Now for a bit of good news. This week in St Kilda, a 40-year-old mystery was solved and a piece of naval history restored. A bronze bust of the man considered the father of the Australian Navy, Vice Admiral William Creswell, disappeared from a St Kilda park in the 1970s. But some detective work by his surviving family and the local Navy League has had some surprising results. For about 40 years, this plinth has sat empty.
And it sort of vanished off the plinth in the St Kilda foreshore, and I suppose people were hopeful that it would be returned, and then it sort of fell out of the people's memories for a while.
I took this photo in 1970 when this is the original bust of the Admiral.
But the family of Vice Admiral William Creswell have never forgotten.
This is the Admiral's cocked hat, which is looking a little sad.
I grew up with that on the hall table. He was my grandfather. There were these wonderful stories of him and what a great man he had been.
William Creswell joined the British Navy when he was just 13 years old in 1865.
That was very hard for a young boy, but he sort of battled through it.
He later moved to Australia and, as a senior naval officer, tried to persuade the British Admiralty to allow Australia to control its own navy.
Creswell's constant pushing for an Australian Navy had achieved a very good result, and by December 1910 the first two ships arrived, the Yarra and the Parramatta, so that by the time the unknown World War I at that time in 1914 started, we had a very good fleet. He's looked at as being the father of the Australian Navy.
But his effigy, cast in bronze, has long been missing from its St Kilda monument.
And for years and years, the plinth has just stayed there. 6 or 7 years ago, I suppose, we thought really something should be done.
Luckily, the widow of one of Creswell's grandsons found the Navy was careful with its history. Rosemary Creswell found an old plaster cast of the bust at a naval college in New South Wales.
It was just by chance. I was up at HMS Creswell and we went to the wardroom. We found this bust. It was all gold, or painted in gold.
Quite an old salt, really, isn't he?
With the old plaster cast as a guide, the Meridian Foundry in Fitzroy began recreating the Creswell bust 6 months ago.
This was a plaster that was done off a much earlier mould. The sculptor had modelled it in clay and even got his signature on the side. This is the wax pattern that we'll use to achieve the bronze casting.
Elizabeth SEVOIR and Rosemary Creswell watched the process take place.
The wax is melted out, and then the mould, once the mould's perfectly dry and fired and totally wax-free, the mould's embedded in sand, and then the bronze is poured in.
2 busts are poured, one for the St Kilda plinth and one to be kept at the Royal Australian Navy College in Jervis Bay.
This process has hardly changed since at least the 19th century, but essentially it's still all hand done, takes a long time and is very expensive.
The next day, the moulds are hacked apart. And on Monday, the day of unveiling arrived. It's a big day for the Creswell family. 3 of the Vice Admiral's grandchildren were there, and many great-great-grandchildren.
Well, it's been exciting because it's taken a while.
I remember my mother saying to us as children, there he is looking out to sea.
The memorial to a man who spent much of his life on the water is back in its rightful place. And how concerned are you that it might get pinched again?
Not at all. This time it will be well and truly secured.